All right, everybody, welcome to our sixth virtual Monday lunch. We've got a great guest with us today, Judge Jeff Wentworth, class of 62. Before we get to him, let's get some quick update from our president, Bill Hill.
Thanks, Logan, and howdy, Ags. I'm Bill Hill, class of 84, and your San Antonio A&M Club president. We're pleased to have as one of our guest speakers today, one of our own, a regular attendee at Aggie Park on Monday, Judge Jeff. So welcome, Jeff, and more to follow on that. You know, it's been 14 weeks since we had our last Monday lunch. That was on March 9th. Seems like forever. And I thought today that I would join you from Aggie Park. Yes, I'm sitting here at the podium at Aggie Park with the ATM that Logan built here recently. Thank you, Logan. And so the idea is, again, I addressed this briefly last week, is when are we going to get Aggie Park open and when are we going to get back to things as we know it? And that's a great question. People are asking me all the time. What I will tell you is that next week we plan to conduct the scholarship luncheon here at Aggie Park with between 8 and 10 of our scholarship students here live on Monday at Aggie Park. And so we're going to use that as a rehearsal for future Monday lunches and kind of see where that goes. So what's different about that is previously, like today, we are actually video teleconferencing and recording this in advance, and then we're going to post that on Monday lunch. This next Monday, we'll be doing it live on Monday at noon. So we'll see how that goes, video taping it and recording it, live streaming at the same time. Hopefully we can pull that off. And really, that's probably the way in the future. And many times we've done these virtual Monday lunches. We've had some great speakers, but we actually get more participation, video live stream, to people viewing these recordings than we do sometimes at Aggie Park. So I think it's a combination of both in the future. So when we really talk about opening up Aggie Park, it's really two things. Do we open up the event center and rent that so that we can get revenue, pay our staff, and continue operations? So we're looking at doing that as soon as we can. And I think the governor has allowed that. Then there's the other events where we bring in fellow Aggies from San Antonio and we bring them into Aggie Park. We're looking forward to doing that as soon as we can. And we have to balance that with what's going on with the COVID-19. Now, yesterday, Bexar County reported 230 new COVID cases. Now, that's concerning because you'll recall it was like March 10th or 11th when the first case was reported in Bexar County. The mayor in San Antonio and the Bexar County judge, they shut down the entire city and the county and basically put everyone at home. That's with a single case. And Saturday probably reports from Friday, 230 new cases. So that's concerning. What's also concerning is the 7-day rolling average of 136 new cases per day for the last 7 days here in Bexar County. In Texas, that's 2,299 per day, which both of those are all-time highs. So again, we have to balance that. That in itself is not too alarming because we know we have over 3,000 tests a day, and whereas before we only had a couple hundred. But we're also tracking the number of folks that are in hospital. And yesterday there were 148, which far exceeds the average of about 50 from about 2 weeks ago. So more to follow. We're going to look at it reopening. We have to be cautious. And we have to keep in mind that many of our members are also over 65 and are at the most risk. So you can expect us to reopen slowly and cautiously, more to follow as we move forward. One of the first things we're going to do is our young Aggies are going to, they've started some events, they've got them planned. In fact, happy hour, June 18th, and to be determined. The young Aggies have a network and they'll pass that information out through their email and so forth. But June 29th, we're planning on doing steak and game night here at Aggie Park. And that's going to be great news. The next big event we have at Aggie Park is July 18th at this Aggie Family Barbecue. So it'll probably be mostly outdoors, but we're looking forward to getting all of our Aggie family back here at Aggie Park. Some of you may be wondering about Coaches Night. Unfortunately, I don't have an update to give. I know we've had some video teleconferences and some coordination meetings. I think there's going to be a Coaches Night of some sort, but we're not exactly sure or when. As soon as we get that information out, we will let you know. Again, be looking for updates on Monday lunch coming out in the next week or so. And just remember, just because we decide we're going to have Monday lunch here, each and every one of you should make your own individual decision as to whether or not you want to come and participate in person or by virtual through the internet. Finally, I want to give a capital campaign update. We've got some more good news here. We've increased funding by almost $5,000 last week. Again, not really doing any active fundraising. There's some newsletters that are lingering out there. There's these videos that I give an update for, but we're not taking an active role, but we still brought in almost $500,000. And so right now we're at $946,319. So what that really means is that, well, first I want to highlight many, many thanks to the Mays Family Foundation. You know, they gave us a $450,000 matching grant, of which we have used $123,000 of that $450,000 already. So what does that really mean? We are only $325,000, give or take a little bit, from being fully funded, and we can't do it without you. So again, if you're in that position to where you can give a little, or more importantly, you can pledge a little. Remember, pledges can be made over a 4 or 5 year period of time. A pledge of $1,000 for 4 years would only be $250 a year for 4 years. And if you were able to make that pledge for $1,000, we would be able to turn it in to $1,000 matching donation immediately from the Mays Foundation. Well, look, enough of that. Now I'm pleased to turn it back over to Logan, and I'm looking forward to hearing some great war stories and hearing perspective from the judge. Back to you, Logan.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the update. We're excited this week. We've got one of our very own Monday lunch regular attendees, member of the club, Judge Jeff Wentworth, class of 1962. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Well, we're talking about trying to get back to normal, get back to Aggie Park, and we're getting another spike in COVID cases. And as we're trying to open up, I saw that Judge Nelson Wolf is asking for authority from the governor to make mandatory face masks, to wear face masks, and seems to be tightening up, and probably rightfully so. Where do you see things going right now?
I what Governor Abbott had to say in regard to, he's watching it with some concern. He's encouraged, but also watching it with concern. And if it gets too bad, I'm pretty sure he's going to make those requirements a little tighter than they are right now.
Well, San Antonio, Bexar County seems to have been doing a good job so far. We've got less cases than a lot of other counties that may not have as high of a population.
I think it's important for people to realize we have nearly 2 million people in this county. And even though Bill said we got 150 in the hospital right now, 150 people out of 2 million, and the majority of those in the hospital are going to recover. They're just being treated right now for COVID. So there's some good in all this news as well as bad.
Definitely. Let's see. You graduated from A&M in 1962, and you kind of got into politics pretty soon thereafter. How'd you get into? Well, you were very involved at A&M. Let's start there with the school. So how'd you get involved with serving the public?
Well, it's a long time ago. I won't go into too much detail, but It started out when I was 8 years old, and in the third grade, we took a field trip to the state capitol. And during a legislative session, sat in the gallery of the House of Representatives, watching them debating bills and voting on bills. We stayed about half an hour. Then went down to the south steps of the Capitol, and the governor of Texas spoke to a couple of hundred third graders. And I decided that day that looked like pretty important work, and I wanted to do that. So decided in the third grade I was going to get involved in politics. So in the fourth grade, I ran for homeroom president. And back in those days, the way you voted for homeroom president was you put your head down on your desk, covered your head, and you raised your hand. And there were just two of us running, another little boy and me. And I knew the other little boy, and I liked him, and I voted for him. And I lost by one vote. So it was a very good political lesson to learn early in life. If you're going to run for an office, don't vote for your opponent.
And every vote counts, sounds like.
That's right. It went on from there. I ran for president of the student, or tried to run for president of the student body when I was in junior high. I had a really good-looking girl who ran against me, and she whipped my ass. Matter of fact, every officer in the student council in junior high was a girl, except for me. They finally let me be parliamentarian, but I was the only male officer of junior high student council. So then when we got to high school, having learned my lesson, I found the absolute knockout, best looking girl in school who happened to be the captain of the pep squad, and made her my campaign manager. And my opponent, I should not have won. My opponent had been elected president of our class. He'd been elected the most represented boy. He was tri-captain of the football team. I, of course, was president of the Latin club and played clarinet in the band. But I had this gorgeous girl as my campaign manager, and I whipped his ass. So,
now, is this in San Antonio?
Alamo, right?
Alamo Heights High School. Do you remember her name?
Carolyn Lehman. You bet. She was a gorgeous woman. Her daddy was regional manager for Westinghouse. And Westinghouse back then had a motto of, "You can be sure if it's Westinghouse." And so her mother and she put together signs and said, "You can be sure if it's Wentworth," and plastered the school with those signs. We had a very limited budget. I think we could only spend like $10 or $15 on our campaign. I'm pretty sure Carolyn and her mother exceeded that budget, but they never let me know for sure.
Well, we won't get into the campaign finances of high school. Yeah. And then you get to A&M. How'd that get going?
I got active early on. Helped some other people get elected to different things. Wound up being a senior class representative to the Memorial Student Center Council. Was on the election commission, in the pre-law society. It was really kind of fun because on the senior class rep to the MSC Council, there were several of us that ran, and there was a runoff. Two of us tied. Matter of fact, a fellow San Antonio Aggie, class of '62, he and I tied, and that had never happened before, and they didn't know what to do. So the dean of students at the time, Dean Hannigan, said, "Well, the solution is we just give you each a half vote, and you both serve on the MSC Council." And my opponent said, "Well, that sounded like a good compromise." And I said, "Sorry, I'm not going to sit on the council and have a half a vote. I'd rather not be on the council at all than have a half vote." So I insisted that we have a runoff, and we did have a runoff, and I won that election. So I served as a full voting member of the MSC Council.
Well, that's great. You were there when General Rutter was president of the university, correct?
I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have any I'm sure you got to work with him and be around him and speak with him, one of the great Aggies, one of the great Americans. Do you have any stories about General Rutter you could share with us?
Well, it's funny you should, Logan. Yes, I do have one. Back when I was a senior, we had a process for selecting Aggies to who's who in American universities and colleges. And because we were a divided campus, cadets and non-regs, the way it worked, if somebody wanted to nominate somebody to be in Who's Who, it could be a faculty member, a staff member, or a fellow student. You simply nominated that person. If that person were a civilian, their name went to a committee made up totally of civilian Aggie students. And they would go through and they would pick finalists. Same thing for the cadets. If you were a cadet and you were nominated, you would go to this cadet screening committee, which I happen to be chairman of. There were 12 of us on that committee. And we would call out some, and then we would send the finalists from our committee to the selection committee, which was made up of staff, students, and faculty, all three. And there were 8 members of that committee. Well, in my committee, one of the nominees was the president of the student body, which kind of normal. You would think the president of the student body would make Who's Who in American universities and colleges. But there were a number of us who knew the president of the student body really well and didn't believe that he had the kind of character necessary to be selected. So our committee voted 10-2 not to forward his name as a finalist to the selection committee. But because he was president of the student body, we decided we might be biased. So we sent his name up anyway. We let the selection committee know that we voted 10-2 against him, but if they wanted to go ahead and select him, we were not going to object. So his name did go up to the full 8-member selection committee. Well, as it turned out, I was one of those 8 members as well. We had the discussion and debate, and we wound up voting 7-1 not to select that individual Aggie. The one who voted for him was J. Wayne Stark, who was the director of the MSc at the time. And he said the reason he voted for him was because when this guy didn't make it, he was going to attack Mr. Stark as the one responsible. And he said, I want to be able to tell him that, no, you're wrong. I was the only one that voted for you. So really, the selection committee really, truthfully, was 8-0 against him. As it turns out, the day before all of those people were reported in the battalion, I got a phone call saying that, in fact, the next day, instead of 37 Aggies being selected to Who's Who in American universities and colleges, there'd be 38, including the president of the student body. And I said, well, how could that happen? He was not selected by the cadet screening committee. He was not selected by the selection committee. How in the world is his name going to be in a photograph in the bat tomorrow? And they said, well, when we presented the 37 names to General Hannigan, the dean of students, he looked at the 37 and said, well, where's the name of the president of the student body? And it was explained to him that he wasn't selected. And he said, well, why? And they said, well, the selection committee and the cadet screening committee didn't feel like he had the proper character. And the dean said, well, I nominated him, and I think he does, and I'm ordering you to put him on the list. So they did. They put him on the list. And if you look at the Aggie land for 1962, you'll find, I won't divulge his name, but you'll find 38 people selected, not the 37 we were allocated. Well, as luck would have it, not long after that, well, let me back up. After that happened, I was so offended by Dean Hannigan's overruling 2 committees and completely violating all the rules that we had in place. I wrote a letter to the editor of the battalion, and I got about 6 or 7 fellow seniors to co-sign the letter with me. And we didn't attack the cadet because it wasn't his fault. We were attacking the dean of students, who happened to be a brigadier general, retired, and said, this is not the way this was supposed to have happened. And that was printed in the battalion the same day that they had the 38 photographs of the selectees. Well, about a week or so later, President Rutter had the MSc council in his office to discuss some MSc business. I was in the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, as we're filing out of his office, President Rutter said, Mr. Wentworth, I need you to stay behind for just a minute. So everybody else leaves the office, and I'm there with President Rutter, and he has me take a seat, and he said, son, you probably don't know this, but the Board of Regents subscribes to the battalion. They get it in the mail. And he said, since your letter to the editor was printed, I've gotten several phone calls from members of the Board of Regents who said they want me to find out if what you printed was true. And if it was true, they want me to fire General Hannigan. And he said, I want you to know that General Hannigan is my right arm in running this campus. And I don't care whether what you printed in the letter to the editor was true or not. I'm not going to fire you. And I don't want you writing any more letters to the editor. I assured him that I didn't have any more letters to write, that the only letter I had to write, I had already written. And he said, well, that's good. And that was the end of our meeting.
That's great. When you were, during that time, the name of the university was the Agricultural and Mechanical School of Texas. Is that correct?
No, not
What was it?
Agricultural and Mechanical College.
College of Texas.
Right. And that's on my ring. My ring says A&M College of Texas.
You can still read it?
Oh, you absolutely.
It's not worn down?
Well, I've had this ring for about 30 years, but
Okay.
I graduated 60 years ago, but, or 58, I guess. The first ring was burglarized out of my house. So this is the second Aggie ring I've had. But it's in College of Texas.
Well, I know that it is no longer named that. It's Texas A&M University. And I heard you telling a story a few years back about how that name came about. And could you dive into that a little bit with us and tell us about that?
Sure, I'll be glad to hear that story with you. It was the spring of 1961. I was a junior in the band, living on the first stoop of Dorm 11. And by the way you got in the band back in the fall of 58, when I first enrolled, was you simply put Dorm 11 on your room reservation card. There were no auditions. You just put that you wanted to live in Dorm 11 and you were in the band. It's a little different now. When my son wanted to be in the band, he had to be auditioned. He had never played the snare drum, but that's what he played the timpani in the Alamo Heights High School band. Well, we don't have timpanis in the Fighting Texas Aggie band. You can't march with the timpani, but he wanted to play the snare drum. So he took one snare drum lesson the night before he was to be auditioned. I drive him to College Station. I wait out in the hall while he's being auditioned by the band director. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, the band director comes out. Jason wanders down the hall, and the band director says, well, Senator, your son's gotten a little rusty over the summer, but I think we'll get him back in shape. For 4 years at Alamo Heights, he had played on the sideline as part of the sideline, the cymbals and not the cymbals, but the xylophone and the timpani and all that on the 50-yard line. He'd never marched in a single football game in his life until he marched on Kyle Field in front of about 65,000 people. But they didn't kill him. He didn't misstep or anything.
That had to be nerve-wracking.
I was living in Dorm 11 on the first stoop. My roommate was Joe Tom Easley from Eagle Pass. That year, I had a different roommate every year, and Joe Tom was my roommate our junior year. He was reading the Bryan Daily Eagle and found an article, a small article buried on the back pages of the Bryan Daily Eagle, talking about a bill that Senator Bill Moore of Brazos County had introduced to change the name from the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas to Texas State University and Agricultural and Mechanical College. And so he reads this news story aloud to me and then says, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I kind of like the idea of substituting university for college. That makes it sound bigger and better and more prestigious. But frankly, I don't like the Texas State part. I would prefer us to be called Texas A&M University. And Joe Tom said, well, I believe the same way. Why don't we drive over to Austin tomorrow and talk to Governor Price Daniel about this? Well, that sounded like a better thing to do the next day than going to class. So we got in our civilian clothes. We jumped in Joe Tom's Pontiac Bonneville and we drive over to Austin, believing that you could just drop in on the governor of Texas without an appointment and talk to him about some bill. Well, in 1961, you could, and we did. We weren't kept waiting in the governor's reception room on the second floor of the state capitol more than about, I don't know, 15 minutes or so. And we were ushered right into Governor Daniels' office. And we told him about this bill that we read about in the paper and that we didn't like it. We wanted it to be A&M University, not Texas State University. Well, now that I know a little more about the legislative process, I've got to say that Governor Daniel was extremely courteous and diplomatic with us. Instead of saying, as he could very well have said, now let me get this straight. This is a bill that some senator has introduced. It hasn't had a committee hearing. It hasn't passed the Senate or the House of Representatives. It's nowhere near my desk. And you guys are talking to me about this bill. But he didn't say any of that. He was very polite. And he said, well, what I'd suggest, if you don't like Senator Moore's bill, I'd suggest you go talk to Senator Moore about changing his bill. He said, now, having said that, he said, I know Senator Moore pretty well. I've known him for a number of years, and he's usually pretty proud of his bills and doesn't usually want to change them much. So he said, if you go talk to him and he doesn't want to change the bill, what I'd recommend you do is find some other member of the Texas Senate who's an Aggie who agrees with you and would help you try to amend the bill on the floor of the Senate. So we thanked him very much for his time, and we went over to the floor of the Senate. The Senate was in session that morning, and we sent a little note in to the floor, and literally within 10 or 15 minutes, Senator Moore comes off the floor of the Senate to talk to us. Well, he comes down the 4 or 5 stone steps from the floor of the Senate down to where we were standing, and he kind of wobbles getting down those 4 or 5 steps. And when he got to the bottom and he started talking to us, we began to smell the alcohol on his breath and realized he'd been drinking on the floor of the Senate. But he was, he could understand what we were saying, and he wasn't totally drunk. But we explained to him that we wanted his bill changed from Texas State University to Texas A&M University. And he explained to us in no uncertain terms that we were young and dumb, and that we did not appreciate the fact that we were a land grant college, that we were founded by the United States Congress by passage of the Morrill Act many years ago, and that all the other A&Ms in the country practically had changed their names. Oklahoma, A&M was Oklahoma State, Kansas A&M was Kansas State, Michigan A&M was Michigan State. He said the only other A&M left in the whole country is the goddamn blank school in Florida, and the blank, he used the N-word. So we realized he was not going to change his mind. So that was pretty much the end of the conversation, because even 60 years ago in 1961, use of the N-word was not socially acceptable. So Joe Tom and I spent the rest of the day trying to find an Aggie senator that agreed with us, and we came up with one. Senator Baker, Bob Baker of Houston, agreed with us, and he said he'd help us try to amend the bill on the floor of the Senate. And he said, now, which one of you is the Corps commander and which one is the president's student body? And Joe Tom and I said, well, no, we're just a couple of juniors in the band. And he said, and where are y'all from? And we said, Eagle Pass in San Antonio. And he said, no, this is not going to work. He said, my district's in Houston. He said, I can't be responding to a couple of juniors in the band from Eagle Pass in San Antonio. He said, you're going to have to go back to campus and either get a student senate resolution saying you like A&M University, or a bunch of petitions signed by students. You're going to have to come back with something more concrete than just a couple of juniors in the band from 2 cities that I don't even represent in the Senate. So we thank him. We drive back to College Station, and I'm assuming that we're going to just get the student senate to pass a resolution. That would take the least amount of time, the least amount of effort, and we'd be done with it. But Joe Tom would have none of it. He said, no, we're not going to take this idea. This is our idea. We're not going to take this back to a bunch of student politicians that didn't have this. This is not their project. We're going to get petitions signed. So we go back to campus. We spend a couple of weeks. We get legal sheets, lots of legal sheets. Put a mark down the middle of the sheet from the top to the bottom of these legal size sheets. And on the left-hand side at the top of this paper, we said, we want our school's name changed we want our school's name changed to Texas A&M University. And on the right-hand half of the page, at the top of the page, we wrote, we want our school's name changed to Texas State University and Agricultural Mechanical College. And you could sign either side. Well, at the end of a couple of weeks, we had 2 pounds of petitions with, I think, 1,400 plus signatures saying that they wanted it to be Texas A&M University, and less than 150 saying they wanted it to be Texas State. So armed with that, Tom and I get in our uniforms this time. We don't go in our civilian clothes. We get in our uniforms, we drive back to the state capitol in Austin. We present these petitions to Senator Baker, who has the foresight to call in a Senate photographer. And the Senate photographer takes a photograph of these 2 young cadets presenting these petitions to Senator Baker about the proposed name change. And Senator Baker then takes this photograph and sends it to the Associated Press Wire Photo Service, flashes around the state. And that photograph is in a number of daily newspapers in Texas the following morning. And that was the first time Aggie alumni ever heard of this awful bill. And they rose up as one and let all their state senators and state representatives know they did not want Senator Moore's bill to pass. So in 1961, it was killed. Joe, Tom, and I graduate. I'm off on active duty. In 1963, the state rep from that area, whose name I forget right now, David Haynes. David Haynes of Brazos County introduced the bill in 1963, the next regular session of the legislature, to change the name to Texas A&M University, which passed the legislature and was signed by the governor. Now, if you'll fast forward from that year, 1963, when the bill passed to change it to A&M University, fast forward to 1993, 30 years later, I'm in the Texas Senate as a member. Bob Bullock is the Lieutenant Governor of Texas. He's presiding over the Senate one morning, and he interrupts the proceedings to announce that we have a distinguished former member of the Texas Senate present as a guest, former Senator Bill Moore from Brazos County. Bill Moore sitting along the side of the Senate chamber, and we all clap for him. And he stays there to the end of the session. So when we adjourn the end of the day, I walk over to him, shake hands with him, and say, Senator, you'd have no reason to remember me, but back in 1961, my college roommate and I came to see you about your bill when you tried to change the name to Texas State University. And he said, you know, we should have passed that bill. We should not have changed it to A&M University. He said, you know, there's only one other A&M University left in the country today, and it's a black school in Florida. So there you have it, a little social progress on his part in 32 years. Took 32 years. Anyway, that's the name change story.
That's a great story, and hopefully he has had a little bit more social progress since then, or before he passed away.
Since passed away. I shared that story with his daughter and son-in-law, just like I've told you, and they said, "Yeah, that's Daddy. That was Daddy. You know, he was just a racist."
Well, times have definitely changed. Do you still have those legal sheets by any chance that you had those 1,400 signed?
No, we gave them all to Senator Baker.
That would be that'd be neat to see who signed that. I think my dad was at Texas A&M during that time, and he'd have been a fish. He'd been a freshman that year.
He was a class of 65.
65, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Was he in the band by chance?
No, he was not. Let's see, you got to be governor for the day on your birthday back in 2004. How was that? What does that entail?
Well, that was great. It's a ceremony that we engage in the Texas Senate. What happens is if you're the most senior member of the Senate who has not been elected president pro tem, at the beginning of the session every other year, you elect a president pro tem of the Senate who presides when the lieutenant governor, who's the presiding officer of the Senate, when he's not there. If the governor is out of state, the lieutenant governor becomes the acting governor of Texas. If the governor and lieutenant governor are both out of state, then the president pro tem of the Senate becomes the acting governor of Texas. And during my time as as president pro tem, there were two occasions when that happened. One was the Republican National Convention in New York. Both Governor Bush and Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst went off to New York City to be delegates at the Republican National Convention. They asked me if I were going to the National Convention. I said, hell no, I'm staying in Texas to be governor while you guys are gone. That was 4 or 5 days. And then on November 20th of 2004, they intentionally left the state so we could have the ceremony. And we have a big ceremony in the Senate chamber. Typically, the tradition is the Longhorn Band, because they're based in Austin, plays at the inauguration. I wouldn't have that, of course. So I had the Aggie Band came over from College Station and at my inauguration. It was a great day.
Hey, that's pretty cool. So what are some of the things you're most proud of during your time in the Texas Senate or in politics?
Well, I guess if I had to look back at the bills, I introduced, either authored or co-authored, about 600 bills that were actually passed and signed by the governor. If I had to pick 3 or 4, probably the most important was the Texas Grant Program. The Texas Grant Program was one that I worked on for several sessions that would help people who had good grades, graduated from high school, but whose families just didn't have enough money to send them off to college, with tuition and transportation and books and clothing and housing and room and board, all that stuff. So it took me several sessions. The first session I tried to get it done, I introduced it in 1993. It was heard by the Senate Finance Committee, and everybody said good things about it. They said, that's a good program, but when they voted, nobody voted for the bill. So it didn't even get to the floor. At the end of that session, when we were adopting the budget for the whole state, they came around to me and said, how are you voting? And I said, I'm voting no. And they said, oh, you don't understand. Lieutenant Governor Bullock doesn't allow any no votes on the budget. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't represent Lieutenant Governor Bullock. I represent Senate District, at that time, 26, later changed to 25. I represent those people. They didn't pass my Texas Grant Program. It was then called the Texas Tuition Assistance Grant Program. We'd had it in place, but never funded it, never gave it any money. And they said, well, honest to God, we don't have any money this year, but if we promise that we'll fund it in 95, can you vote for it this year? And I said, okay, if you promise to fund it next year. So I did, I voted for the budget. The next year, I introduced it again, heard it in the Senate Finance Committee. It was voted down. Only one senator, Senator Barrientos of Travis County, voted for it. Everybody else voted no. So it didn't get to the floor. Wasn't in the budget. And then they came around taking votes on the budget. I said, no, I'm a no vote. They said, no, you can't be a no vote. And I said, no. You all promised me that we would fund the Texas Tuition Assistance Grant Program this year. And John Monford, who now lives in San Antonio, was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee at the time. He represented the district around Lubbock at the time. And he said, you know, I actually do remember that promise that I made. So we went back and they came up with a pitiful amount of money. It was like $250,000 or $300,000. But I voted for the budget. And then I got Senator Ellis of Harris County and Representative Cuellar, now Congressman Cuellar of Laredo, to help me. And the 3 of us got the Texas Grant Program going. It's now spent, I don't know, probably $1.5 billion helping over 100,000 students, maybe 200,000 students by this time, with their college expenses. So I think that's probably the most impactful single piece of legislation I introduced. The other one that I'm really proud of, though, is one where I found out that our kids weren't saying the pledge to the flag, and they weren't allowed to pray. The U.S. Supreme Court decided back in the 60s that you couldn't pray in school anymore. Well, I read in the newspaper sometime earlier in this century that the Commonwealth of Virginia had passed a bill that set aside time every day that students were required to have 60 seconds, full minute, for reflection, meditation, or prayer. One of the three.
Moment of silence, yeah.
Didn't have to be for, well, it's not a moment. Actually, the press likes to say a moment, but it's really a minute. It's a full minute. And it's in law that it's a minute. So I decided that I would introduce that bill. It was challenged in federal court, and the federal court upheld the law, said, no, it's not unconstitutional. So they upheld it. So I tracked the same language the Virginia statute had, because I knew that if I got that passed in Texas, it would be challenged in federal court. And I wanted precedent in some other state. So I introduced the bill, and then I added that you had to say the pledge to the United States flag and a pledge to the Texas flag, in addition to the 60 seconds of silence for reflection, meditation, or prayer. That bill passed, was signed by law, in the law by the governor, was challenged in federal court in Dallas, went to the federal appeals court in New Orleans, and was upheld. And today, for the last nearly 20 years now, every public school student every day says a pledge to the Texas flag, to the US flag, and has 60 seconds of silence for meditation, reflection, or prayer.
That's pretty awesome. Well, you know, coming to Aggie Park, we always say the Pledge of Allegiance and the pledge to the Texas flag, and we don't have a minute of silence. It's usually filled with some stories from John Kimbrough and a prayer from him. But that's something we're definitely proud of at Aggie Park that we can do, and proud that we can do it. Do you have any advice for young Aggies that want to get into politics during these times? You know, the whole landscape's changed quite a bit, and it's with social media now, you know, there's anything and everything you've ever done, you know, is there for the world to see. And it's got to be tough for people to make a decision to jump into politics at this time. Do you have any advice for any of these young Ags?
Based on, I'd say one of the most important things to be very careful about what you post on social media, because as you say, people are going back years and finding things that they wouldn't say or think today, but it's being held against them today, sometimes wrongfully in my judgment. But I guess the best way to do it, if you want to get active in politics, is to get active in somebody's campaign. Become a volunteer, become a paid staffer even, you know, go door to door, campaign for somebody you believe in. That's the way to get your feet wet and see if you like it.
Well, that's good. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and really enjoyed the stories. And I see Bill, you're standing outside. You're in front of Aggie Park now. Do you have any last words for us before we adjourn? Here, let me get you. There you go.
Okay. Well, hey, great program, Judge. Those are fascinating stories. I tell you what, we have treasures amongst us, and you're one of those. There's a lot of people that they just live to serve, and that's one of the primary things that Aggies do is serve. So thank you very much for recounting some of those great stories. Yeah, I had to relocate in front of Aggie Park. I got kicked out from the inside, but anyway, great program today. I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Wish us luck, and hopefully we'll be back at Aggie Park before too long. Thanks. Gig 'em.
Thanks, Bill. Judge Wentworth, thanks again, and hopefully we see you soon once we get things going back at Aggie Park here in a couple weeks.
I'm looking forward to it.
All righty. Y'all have a good day. Bye-bye.